You know you're busy, right? But you still want to be in the loop when it feels like the whole world is changing around us. And that's exactly what we're doing here, cutting through all the noise, getting to what really matters. Today, we're diving deep into this trade war between the U.S. and China. Things have been moving so fast this week, leading up to today, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot to sift through to get to the heart of it. We've got reports from CNN, Reuters, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, even a whole briefing document, just to make sure we bring you the really important stuff.
So, our mission today, pretty simple. We're going to break down what's happening, why it matters, and what it could mean in the long run. All that without overloading you with too much information. So, let's get started. What's the latest development in all of this?
Okay, so as of today, Friday, April 11th, the big news is China's announcement that they're raising tariffs on U.S. goods to a pretty hefty 125%.
Wow, 125%. And this isn't some future thing, is it? When does this take effect?
That's the thing. It kicks in tomorrow, Saturday.
Wow. So can you help me understand this? What exactly triggered this? And how does it stack up against what the U.S. has been doing?
This move by China is a direct response to the U.S. raising tariffs on Chinese goods. And when you factor in the new tariffs on top of the ones already in place, we're talking about Chinese exports to the U.S. facing a minimum tariff rate of about 145%.
So China's increase to 125% is big, but they're basically saying it's a reaction to even bigger tariffs the U.S. put on them, right?
Right. And the language they're using is really interesting, too. The Chinese Finance Ministry straight up called the U.S. tariff hikes a joke.
Oh, wow.
And then they said, get this, they're not even planning to match any more tariff increases from the U.S. It seems like they're signaling a change in strategy, moving beyond just going back and forth with tariffs.
So what's the U.S. saying about all this? What's their response?
Well, Jamieson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, called China's move unfortunate. He also mentioned that there aren't any negotiations planned between the two countries right now. It seems like a stalemate, like they're really far apart on this.
We even heard from President Xi Jinping directly this time, which isn't always the case with these trade disputes. What was his message?
President Xi's first public comment on all this was pretty strong. He said that China is not afraid of any unjust suppression. It shows how seriously they're taking this. They're digging in their heels.
So the tariffs are going up and up. What's the immediate fallout, especially in the financial markets?
The markets have definitely reacted. People are talking about a shudder going through the stock markets. There's been a lot of volatility. We did see things calm down a bit this morning. But the thing is, major indexes have already taken a hit. They're down about 6 or 7% since President Trump first hinted at these new tariffs.
That's a pretty steep drop in a short amount of time. How are other markets around the world taking this?
European markets, measured by the Stoxx Europe 600 index, have been trending downwards. Japan's Nikkei 225 index has seen a bigger drop, ending the week down 3%. And even U.S. stock futures, after that initial sell-off, have only shown small gains, which suggests there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
It's not just the stock market reacting to this, is it? I've been seeing reports about the dollar and the price of gold changing, too.
You're right. The U.S. dollar has been dropping for 5 days straight. It's had its worst week since 2022. And at the same time, gold prices have surged to record highs. This is a classic move when investors are nervous. They look for safe places to put their money, like gold.
Okay. So what about the bond market? What's going on there?
The bond market is also feeling the pressure. We saw the yield on the 10-year Treasury note climb above 4.5%. Basically, this means it's getting more expensive to borrow money for things like mortgages and business loans. It reflects those wider worries about the economy.
So it seems like there's a lot of anxiety in the markets. Are we hearing anything from those at the top of the financial world? What are they saying?
We are. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, has warned about some serious turbulence ahead for the economy. And Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, has even compared this situation to past financial crises. He talked about the uncertainty and anxiety he's seeing right now. It's not every day you hear this kind of talk from such influential figures.
Okay, so China has said they're not going to keep matching the U.S. tariff increases, right? What else could they do? How else might they retaliate?
That's a really important point. China has been very clear that they're not going to get stuck in this back and forth with tariffs forever. They've said they'll be looking at other options, and we're already seeing some of those play out.
Like what? What are some examples of how they might retaliate without using tariffs?
Well, they just announced restrictions on Hollywood films coming into China, and they've issued a travel advisory for Chinese citizens thinking about visiting the U.S. They even put out a separate alert specifically for students considering Ohio. These are targeted moves that go beyond just economic measures.
Interesting. So they're moving beyond just hitting back on trade. What about the rest of the world? How are other major economies reacting to all this?
We're seeing a mixed bag of reactions. The European Union is definitely worried. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has even said they might tax U.S. tech companies if the trade situation doesn't get better. But on the other hand, they've also put a 90-day pause on some of their own retaliatory tariffs against the U.S.
So it's a bit of a two-sided response from the EU. Concerned, but maybe still open to talking.
Yeah, exactly. Their trade commissioner, Maros Sefcovic, is actually planning to visit Washington soon. He's going to try and work out some trade deals, so there's still hope for a negotiated solution. But some key European figures, like French President Emmanuel Macron, have said this tariff pause is very fragile. And the EU's economy minister called the remaining U.S. tariffs a blow to the global economy, so they're clearly still worried about the situation.
What about other big players outside of the U.S. and Europe? What are they doing?
Canada has been very vocal about their opposition. Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised to fight back against what he calls unjustified U.S. tariffs, especially those on steel, aluminum, and cars.
It seems like this approach from the U.S. might be straining relationships with some of their usual allies. Is China taking advantage of this? Are they trying to strengthen ties with other countries?
Definitely. China is working hard to build support elsewhere. President Xi Jinping recently met with the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and he pushed for China and the EU to team up against what he called unilateral bullying, obviously aimed at the U.S. And President Xi is also heading to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia soon. Those are strategically important countries in Southeast Asia. Analysts are saying he'll likely be offering better market access, especially for agricultural products, as a way to strengthen those relationships.
It does seem significant, that trip to Southeast Asia, especially with those recent tariffs, even if they are paused, affecting those countries.
It is. And it's not just these big diplomatic meetings. China's commerce minister has been having video calls with trade officials from the EU, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa. They're really working to expand their network of economic partners.
Right. And there was some talk about a possible easing of tensions between China and the EU specifically, right?
Yeah. They've agreed to restart talks about trade relief and to start negotiating on electric vehicle pricing. It could be a sign of a potential truce in that area. And as one source pointed out, it might mean China can focus most of its energy on the trade dispute with the U.S.
So we're seeing these immediate jitters in the markets and a lot of different reactions globally. What could happen in the long run if this trade war keeps escalating? Are we talking about a major change in the global economic order?
That's definitely a possibility. The tariffs they're putting in place are so high that it's raising serious questions about whether the U.S. and China can even trade directly anymore. Some analysts think that once tariffs go above a certain point, maybe around 35%, trade just isn't profitable anymore. It cuts into profits too much. UBS, when they analyzed China's decision not to raise tariffs further, they actually said that trade between the two countries has been completely severed.
So what happens to the rest of the global economy if direct trade between these two giants basically stops? What kind of ripple effects would we see?
Well, we'd probably see massive changes in global supply chains. The U.S. has said they want to diversify from China. They're pushing companies to move their production to other countries. We saw that happen after the last round of tariffs, with some production shifting to Vietnam, for example. But that can have downsides, too. U.S. farmers, for instance, they rely heavily on the Chinese market for their exports. They could be hit hard.
And what about those trade blocs we talked about? Could we see them becoming more permanent?
It's looking more likely. China is strengthening ties with Europe and other parts of the world, so it's possible that the U.S. ends up more isolated because of its trade policies, and that could lead to the creation of these separate trade alliances. Plus, the financial markets are still shaky and the U.S. dollar is weakening. These could be long-term consequences of this whole trade war.
So we've got these big economic and international impacts. But in the middle of all this, our sources also highlighted a very personal story about someone who was mistakenly deported.
Yeah. It really shows how these big policies can affect people's lives in a very real way. This man, Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, he lives in Maryland but was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The Supreme Court has ruled that the Trump administration has to help him come back to the U.S., but they didn't say when that has to happen.
So what's the latest on his case?
The Justice Department has asked the judge to slow down the legal process for his return, but the judge is still planning to hold a hearing today on the matter. It shows just how complicated these situations can be, and how long it can take for people to get justice, even when the highest court in the land has ruled in their favor. It connects those big discussions about policy to the actual experiences of individuals.
Absolutely. It makes it all very real. And there was another point in our briefing that really stood out. A pretty scary warning from a CEO who didn't want to be named.
Oh, yeah, that's right. This CEO said that if President Trump's tariffs are fully implemented, their business will go bankrupt by the end of the year. It's a pretty direct and alarming statement about how these trade policies could hurt real businesses and the people they employ. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people's livelihoods.
So just to sum up, we've seen a huge escalation in the trade war between the U.S. and China this week. China has hit back hard with their own tariffs. The financial markets are nervous with a lot of volatility, and it looks like China is shifting tactics, looking beyond just tariffs to retaliate and working to build relationships with other countries. It's possible that this trade war could reshape global trade in a big way, and there's a lot of concern about the future of the global economy. But in the middle of all this, it's important to remember the real-life impact this is having on individuals and businesses.
Exactly. We have to remember that all these global events are connected and have consequences that reach far and wide.
So think about this as you're absorbing all this information. If these changes in global trade keep happening and the global economy is so interconnected, what unexpected effects might we see in areas that go beyond just trade? Think about your everyday life, about new technologies, even cultural exchange. What are some of the ripple effects of this trade war that we might not even be aware of yet?
That's a really important question. It's worth thinking about. Keep an eye on things like the EU Trade Commissioner's trip to Washington and President Xi's visit to Southeast Asia. They might give us some clues about where things are headed.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's more important than ever to understand these complex global issues, especially now.